Hello and welcome to a new episode of Fistful of Movies with me, Andy Furlong. This is Fistful of Movies quarantine edition, I suppose, with us and cinema completely in lockdown. I can't really do a new release in the cinema because there isn't anything, so I've chosen a film that was recommended to me by my housemate called The Platform, which is the feel-good movie of the corona pandemic, only in the sense that this movie is so messed up that you will be thanking your lucky stars if you're one of the lucky ones who was able to sit at home like me for the last 8 weeks, stuffing your face full of every sort of thing you could get your hands on. But anyway, so The Platform is directed by, and excuse my Spanish, I don't really have time to look up every name that I butcher, and I probably wouldn't be able to pronounce it right anyway. So The Platform is directed by Gaztelu-Urrutia, which I believe is his first film as well. It's a very impressive debut, it has to be said. It also stars Ivan Masagiu, Antonio San Juan, Zorian Egulier, and Alexandra Masenke. Maybe that's how you pronounce it. I don't know. Now, the script is actually based on a theatre script by David De Sola and Pedro Rivero, and it's actually a credit in many ways to the cinematic vision and set design and conception of this whole setting literally from the ground up. But because the realization of this idea is so well crafted and shot, it doesn't suffer from the usual kind of jagged stage door kind of feeling that many adaptations from theatre suffer from, if you want to call it that. Now, the description from IMDb of this film is a bit misleading, and the Netflix description as well for that matter, where they both describe The Platform as a movie set in a prison, basically a vertical prison with one cell per level, 2 people per cell, only one food platform, and 2 minutes per day to feed them from up to down. An endless nightmare for all these people trapped in the hole. Now, to me, it's a little bit misleading in a way because it's not exactly a prison per se. It's more complicated than that. So let me elaborate on that description a bit. So we have this massive government banquet full of gourmet food. It's prepared at the top level outside the platform. Then it's lowered down to platform 1. Each platform has 2 prisoners and have about 2 minutes to eat from the table. Then it will go down to platform 2, all the way down to at least platform 200 that we know of. And as it goes further and further down, there is less food left on the table. So, you know, by the time the banquet table gets down to like level 50, there is fuck all food on that table. So if you were down the lower levels, you're screwed, buddy. And all sorts of unseemly shit goes on in the lower levels, which I won't spoil. But to make matters even more complicated, each month, the prisoners, again, if you want to call them that, we can dispute that, but they're randomly assigned a different platform each month. So if you get assigned to platform 1, you get lovely gourmet untouched food. If you get assigned platform 200 next month, you're not eating for the whole month, buddy, because there isn't any food left on the table by the time it gets to you. So, you know, it's not exactly a prison, like I said, although for sure some people are in there because they committed crimes. But some people, like our hero called Gorang, played by Ivan Masiegi, or however you pronounce it, literally looks like a Spanish John Hawkes, actually. But he agreed to go in there in exchange for an accredited diploma, which once he gets into the Vertical Self-Management Center, as it's called, boy, does that seem like a stupid move. And it does kind of beg the question what the outside world knows about this place. It's a bit unclear because you are allowed to bring in one item of your choosing, a luxury item if you will. Gorang brings in a book, the Don Quixote, whereas other people bring in items like ropes and weapons and all sorts of things, pet dogs. So it does make it a bit unclear as to what the outside world knows about the place. It never really fills you in. You can speculate. But the central setup of the vertical self-management center serves a few purposes in the world of this movie. And although it is never specifically stated, and it is up to you to interpret what you want, and this is another reason why I say it's not a prison, it's more like a really extreme social experiment that perhaps mirrors the distribution of wealth and status and the scrutiny of different belief systems in an extreme situation. Perhaps it's very like that. I really find social experiments fascinating, actually, and how a controlled setup and a manufactured environment can expose truths about humanity. I mean, in a way, society itself is a very manufactured thing anyway. Over hundreds or thousands of years, we kind of have entered into a social contract that maybe suppresses our natural animalistic tendencies in order to coexist as close to a kind of harmonious way as possible. We agree not to murder or rape or attack people, probably not because it's in our nature somewhere, but because by opting to be part of a wider coalition, I suppose, we enter into a kind of enforced morality. I mean, it's very interesting actually with this whole COVID-19 situation and how they managed to achieve a kind of enforced lockdown through societal changes, so much so that they had neighbours informing on neighbours who broke lockdown and managed to kind of generate a kind of collective shame and glare from your peers that perhaps would make you more likely to conform, I suppose, than you otherwise would. You kind of get paranoid that there is an unspoken judgment from your peers that maybe makes you go against what you would do or what you otherwise would do. I mean, I had sex in the park during lockdown and I feel very guilty about it, which in other circumstances I'd be high-fiving my friends. But my point is, imagine that they have managed to achieve a suppression of people's natural tendencies over the last few weeks in terms of isolation. Apply that to hundreds of years with things like murder and all these other things, and you begin to see, you know, what kind of startling effect that might occur from entering into a social contract, literally just by being birthed into a society. But the question is, are the results and consequences of a society brought about in an organic way or not, I suppose? And I always find that's what's really interesting about social experiments, because there can be no doubt that the test is set up in a non-organic way and a carefully structured way in order to scrutinize something that might have naturally evolved as a natural consequence of society in a very organic way. It can be argued either way, but there have been a few good ones over the years. The blue eyes, brown eyes experiment is one, set up by a third grade teacher named Jane Elliott, who was an anti-racist activist. And she set up an experiment in her all-white classroom in which she wanted to explore and explain to them the concept of racism, right? So she segregated all the kids with blue eyes from all those with brown eyes. And on the first day, Elliot told her students that possessing blue eyes indicated superiority in intelligence and conferred like extra classroom privilege as to the blue eyes people. But while having brown eyes, you know, they were treated inferior, and quickly the students of the superior colour began to oppress those of the inferior colour, eye colour, imagine, like. And, you know, the brown eyes people started to have negative feelings and self-loathing and fear, and the blue eyes bastards were acting all uppity. The next day, Elliot reversed her exercise, telling the students that her statements the previous day were untrue, and that the reverse situation now prevailed. And the same children who had been oppressed the day before quickly took on the oppressing roles, and vice versa. It's a very interesting study. Look that up. And that's just an example, really. There is loads more. And there's a great film on it, actually, called Experimenter, a few years ago. So anyway, this self-vertical management center in the world of the movie can kind of be described as a social experiment designed, one can only presume, to observe, and this is my opinion, to observe different belief systems and individuals and how they act in a structure that perhaps resembles the workings of the world of the film. Perhaps. We don't know. We never know. And I also make the distinction because there is also thematically going to be a massive overlap with us as a society. And for sure this director is using this movie to explore many aspects of our own society. I mean, the director has said that the film's key message is that humanity will have to move towards the fair distribution of wealth, with an exploration of the importance of individual initiative in driving political change. And it critiques both capitalism and socialist systems. And like, boy, is that an understatement. And I'll take a look at how his message translates into the world of the film in a minute. But I will say his conclusion seems to be nihilistic, judging by the film's end anyway, as a thesis. And using the film, the platform, as indeed an actual platform to explore these ideologies. I mean, I have friends who are capitalists, I have friends who are socialists, and I think both are great ideas in theory, but the actual practicality in implementing anything at all with the variable in the system that is us as human beings ourselves, it's basically impossible. I mean, I personally think you can't have one without the other. You need capitalism to motivate the people as an individual to make money, because we're selfish by nature and we need to be motivated. Then you need socialism to redistribute some of that money into things, I suppose, like healthcare and the vulnerable. But even that is hard enough. And getting back to the platform, while the director has a message, and although I would disagree that it ultimately, does have a strong viewpoint either way, but I think it comes down on the fact, based on my interpretation of the film, that it's impossible to change really because of people. And if you really do try to enact change, no matter how good your intentions, you're actually going to have to become a tyrant. I mean, there's literally a fantastic scene in this movie where two characters come up with this symbolic gesture that will show a change in the system, which is so noble in their heads and perhaps genuinely noble. And they have the best of intentions, but let's just say they completely forget their own humanity. A humanity that was initially intrinsically linked to their message and is now gone, and this kind of labels their symbol nothing more than a hollow gesture. I mean, I would go into more detail in what I mean, but this scene and the whole sequence of events is extreme gallows humor levels of hilarity. I mean, it's a genius scene. And crucially, while this film is brain food for your mind, it really is, while this movie explores perhaps things such as class, religion, political belief systems, and the structure of society itself, although I do want to flag up something, which is a distinction that I made earlier between this being a social experiment for more the world of our film than through our own world, if you understand what I mean. But because I feel like the structure of our own society is made up of people from different class systems and experiences who are unable to relate to other people, not because they are bad people, but because they haven't experienced what these other people have gone through themselves, so they're not able to sympathize. And I feel like a lot of empathy comes from shared experiences, and that's what society lacks. And and that's why it's quite dangerous that we have rich and elite people constantly making decisions for ordinary people without having a clue of that experience. And they don't even mix in those circles, and they're making decisions for our lives. But I feel like in the platform, the fact that each month each prisoner gets sent to a different level or platform, if you will, each month, would surely allow a sense of solidarity that perhaps wouldn't be able to be achieved in our world. Mind you, even in the world of the film, it can be even argued that the shared experience kind of had an even more detrimental effect. And I could be wrong about the power of a shared experience in our own society. I mean, it could have the opposite effect. Getting back to the blue-eyed, brown-eyed experiment I mentioned earlier, when the roles were reversed the next day, there didn't seem to be a lot of empathy between the different kids and the different people in that experiment. I mean, they happily took the other role despite knowing what it was like the day before. So you never know. But anyway, crucially, as I mentioned, while the movie explores all these things, crucially, it's so damn entertaining and thrilling at times, just as a piece of cinema itself. And that is crucial, really, because it is sometimes often overlooked. I mean, us critics sometimes love to talk about what a film is kind of really saying, and that's all well and good. But most of the time, we want to be entertained by a film. The audience members want to be entertained by a film. you know, based on its own merits. And this film really is entertaining. We have this fantastic, absolutely fantastic visualization centerpiece of this massive table filled with food that is so striking, and just how it depletes into leftover scraps to trash to literally a table with nothing on it. It's a fantastic idea, and it's something that us as a viewer can relate to in a very sensory sense. We all know what a beautiful plate of food represents and how good or gourmet it can make us feel. We all know what leftover food tastes like. Us bachelors do anyway. We all know what dirty dishes looks and feels like. We have this kind of direct link to the central motif as it goes down to different levels. We can rejoice in the splendor on level 1 and relate to perfectly presented food, because we all know what it's like. That's why this food porn on Instagram is so, you know, popular. But we can feel a sense of vileness towards people as they walk over their food with their feet, or we can feel the desperation of people on different platforms as they desperately try and stuff their faces in the same way. You know, we can really sense it. And in a movie like Perfume, for instance, where we're able to sense the smell, platform allows us to kind of taste the rotting environment and decay through our own connection with food. And the characters are interesting too. I enjoyed following a character having a strong belief system being tested in an extreme environment like this. Gorang's prisoner roommate, Tiramagazi, is a fantastic character. There's a great scene with him that I don't want to give away. It's almost like a weird Saw meets the movie Misery. And it's so good and intense and story arced in its own way. It's almost like a mini short movie within a movie. It's genius, really. And I mean, there's so many great individual ideas and almost vignettes in this film. And also manages to keep with it the staples of its genre, you know, like sci-fi and horror. It actually manages to utilize things like body horror, not just in a gimmick way, but in a way that is relevant to the plot and the situation at hand as well, I suppose. And it also feels very much like extreme satire as well at times, as the film turns the microscope at the worst, on the worst, should I say, of human behaviour turned up to 11. I was less entertained with the final third of the film. At one point, the movie crescendos into almost this battle royale scenario, actually, that works so well. That's really edge of your seat stuff. And listen, this is just my interpretation. My housemate actually had a totally different take than me on a lot of what unfolded. And it's funny when you watch a film by yourself, sometimes you presume there was only one take. You know, maybe it's a bit of ignorance. Then you start discussing a film with somebody else and realise other people are gleaning different things from the movie. And that's really a sign of a very good movie. But anyway, I felt the final third maybe of the film was where a message or ideal was introduced, quite literally actually, at the expense of entertainment. And that's cool and all. Some people like that, but personally I just disagree with that route. And there was a kind of quasi-religious element introduced. And I know, at least to me, it was brought in to show, in my interpretation again, was how heretics and almost supernatural ideas of grandeur are generated in the most toxic places in a way to generate hope. And people with the best of intentions at times can become them. But I personally didn't find it as interesting as the rest of the film. Come to think of it, didn't Jesus have a lot of visions after wandering around the desert for 40 days, actually, with no food? Well, in a way, similar things happen here, right? And by the end, you know, the film gets back on track and there is a great moment. And overall, you know, I think it's a pretty unmissable movie. It's really entertaining. It's proper brain food. And yeah, just watch it. I'm not sure if a lot of people know about it, but that's The Platform. Check it out.